All right, so welcome to week 4, LAI 560. First reading was chapter 4, From Words Their Way. We have an emergent stage with E&L kids too. It's pretty much the same. They experiment with language, print, text, and speaking. Verbal interactions with their peers is usually better than with teachers or in reference to learning. At the discourse level, when learning a new language, we listen to native speakers in order to get the flow and sound of words. I remember when learning to pronounce Korean words, I would struggle because what I was saying didn't sound right. Once I began studying and writing down the more popular words I was hearing, I started to gain more recognition of word and sentence level. Some kids were different at the beginning of a word. Some sounds were different at the beginning of a word compared to the middle or end in Korean. In Korean, the sounds are written as units where 1 to 4 characters represent a sound. Korean is alphabetic like English, but written differently. Exposure, explanation, and practice is needed to get it, it says on page 93. I have limited exposure to elementary kids, so I haven't much of a reference to go off of, but I think I have witnessed kids pretend reading, which it states on page 94. My own kids were advanced readers, so I don't ever recall that stage. I do remember that their writing developed similarly to what the book describes, missing letters standing in for other sounds, etc. I found the gradual release model particularly interesting because no one ever explains how to actually do it. They just say to do it. Excuse me. People in general like to see their writing in print, although I'd argue high schoolers often don't. But they, like the kids in the book, would, I think, appreciate being able to see what they experienced in print. I think that's why having kids make posters of things they learned from a book is so important. They get to see what they and their peers wrote about a particular thing and can feel a sense of pride in having it shown off, for most students. I did take exception to the part on page 100 where the authors state that to help children develop the deep and wide vocabulary knowledge they will need to succeed in their future academic studies, vocabulary and language learning must become an integral part of the classroom. My issue is that high school students' vocabularies are woefully lacking. Why is that? Do they forget from one year to the next? Did they never internalize what they were taught? It's almost as if they stopped learning in middle school and forgot almost everything they learned. We build vocabulary and practice the skills, and the next moment, they've forgotten it. Read-alouds are helpful in high school too. Reading a variety of different genres helps high schoolers to understand purpose, audience, and stylistic choices made by the writer. The text recommends we carefully select words that are concrete, repeated in the text, and related to the topic. When reading a novel, that's not always possible. I never would have thought my 10th graders would struggle with the word shabby. They saw it in print on the page, we talked about it, and they, on the test, were unable to spell or define it. I received many answers of not too shabby as a sample sentence, and the definition they gave was always shabby means great. Shabby does not mean great, and even after we practiced it and discussed it, its meaning, discussed its meaning, they still didn't get it. Why? I think I mentioned in an earlier week that we use concept sorts for E&L students often. It's a valuable way to build word association. I was surprised to read that kids will associate the length of a word with the size of its referent. Page 106. With all of the sounds they are hearing, how can that be? I think of the word onomatopoeia and wonder how someone could spell it ONMTPA. If they're sounding it out, how does that make sense? I have heard of the LMNOP situation where kids think that's one word. Finally, my last observation from the very long chapter is in reference to the letter sound knowledge and phonics section where they talk about voice and unvoiced sounds. I never struggled with that in English, but boy do I struggle with it in Korean. So many of the letters sound exactly the same, and it all comes down to aspirated sounds. Like a B and an M sound quite similar, and I don't hear a difference when saying the word mo, because the B sound isn't as strong as it is in English. So you can hear it sound like mo or bo, but it's even there when I said it, I put more of an emphasis on the M and the B to make you hear it, but I normally can't. I imagine many English learners struggle with that too, even though to us it's obvious. In reading number 2, the C say right, Scribbling and random marks are actually the beginning of the writing process on page 448. The article talks about making inferences with kids through pictures, asking them what happens before and after. What is the disconnect with high school students that they still cannot make those inferences from a text despite having learned it from an early age on? I was assisting a class yesterday with ninth graders, and the teacher asked them, after modeling it, to find examples in the very short texts where they found examples of aha moments. An aha moment is when a character realizes something they didn't before. He gave clearly identifiable passages, and yet the kids still struggled. Not all of them, of course. He asked them to write about the aha moment on their post-it note. When the students shared out, after sharing with their group, it became obvious that quite a few still had no idea what was going on. One girl actually admitted it. What did they notice about the character and what they figured out? Apparently, nothing. Imagine if the teacher in elementary class asked the kids to describe the before and after and they didn't get it. It's not a concrete thought. It's not like they are putting something in order. With the plant writing, they could say, first we did this and then we did that. I don't know what point I'm getting to other than I just don't understand how that skill gets lost by high school. Research states that we aren't offering enough practice in writing. Where is the research that says we are and kids are just refusing to do it? I gave an argument essay in summer school. Out of 50 kids, 12 turned it in. Could you argue I didn't make it interesting enough for them? Maybe. Or that I didn't model it enough? Maybe. It's just frustrating we are so quick to blame the teachers and never the students. If we did a good enough job, even the most reluctant student would write, right? In reading number 3, literacy activities that highlight emergent readers, I know that in our elementary grades in my district, students take home reader books for a few days and also practice reading the same books in class. I was amazed that the kids never seemed to get bored with reading the same story multiple times over. Obviously, the repetition helps in word recognition and comprehension, so I get why they practice so much. I just find it comical that we can barely get a high school student to read one book, even part of the way through. What I found interesting about this article is that it talks about tapping to rhythmic beats of a rhyme as being beneficial for development. I'm a musical learner myself. I had to recite a poem in college class once, and when I set the poem to a musical beat, it was much easier to memorize. Poetry and performance has always held a special interest for me, and I find much enjoyment from rhythm. For these emergent learners, it seems as though we should provide multiple opportunities to engage them in the multiple intelligences to discover their learning style. I'm surprised none of the research mentions using strategies that cover those intelligences. Articulation and multisensory experiences. I struggle with this one as a learner of a foreign language. Oftentimes, I struggle with hearing certain sounds. For me, what would be helpful is to hear an articulated sound exaggerated while also seeing the letters that represent it. I have noticed that sometimes the letters and sounds go too quickly in an elementary school song, but to make up for it, the teacher plays the video almost daily to get the students to memorize it. I find that the more I hear and see the same words with letter and sound combinations, the better I remember it. I find that songs also help to enhance that practice. When I hear a word I've learned in a song, especially if the word is well articulated in the song, I remember it better. Excuse me. I don't know if I can change my camera around here. Yep, there we go. I wanted to show this particular graph. I found this online. I found this graphic on the internet for the emergent reader literacy diet. I thought it was helpful to have something that relates to the idea of diet. You know, you're always looking at pie charts and everything in terms of like diet foods and diet plans and all that kind of stuff. So I found this really interesting. I'll post this in my post as well, hopefully. It doesn't lose it. But the knowledge building, oral language and vocabulary, spelling and word study, writing conventions, concepts of print, text structures and genres, phonemic awareness, letter sounds, and phonics. I just thought it was really interesting for emergent readers that we look at it from this perspective to see exactly, how much of each one of those categories should be in that learner's diet. All right, that was it. Thank you so much for watching.